Being recorded as well. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties. We are very, very excited to welcome everybody to the China's Children International November 2019 International Adoption Month Adoptee Only Guest Speaker Chat featuring Laura Williams, transracial Chinese American adoptee, researcher, and mentor within the Chinese adoptee community. My name is Charlotte Cotter, and I'm one of the current co-presidents here at China's Children International.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Lainey. I'm the other co-founder and co-president of the CCI Adoptee.
First and foremost, we'd like to extend a huge thank you to Laura for joining us here at today's chat. Thank you so much, Laura. A little bit about a background about CCI and our guest speaker chats. CCI is one of the first international community support and networking organizations created by and for Chinese adoptees. As part of our Adoptee Only Chat program, we've initiated a guest speaker series to invite influential figures in the adoption community to speak about their inspiring work. In this way, we hope to inspire further leadership and promote effective, productive dialogue within the international adoptee and adoption community. This month, we are proud to announce the annual CCI November Guest Chat. This is a special edition of our Adoptee Only Guest Speaker series and is held in honor of November International Adoption Month, and it hopes to amplify adoptee voices that critically and thoughtfully engage in challenging dominant adoption narratives, as well as to encourage others to think about the social, economic, and political conditions that underlie and perpetuate the adoption system and inform our international adoptee communities. That is quite a mouthful, but for this special event, we are extremely excited and honored to welcome Laura Williams to our chat today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Charlotte, Lainey, Mary, and Ava. It's really amazing of CCI's growth and just able to offer this platform, and it's really an honor to be able to be here and talk a little bit about my work, and hopefully have a really meaningful conversation and continue to explore some of these really neat topics in adoption identity and kind of think about and get excited for the future of Chinese adoption and adoption in general, and just overall social change. So thank you.
Awesome. Lee.
Yep. We should introduce our guest. So Laura X. Williams is a transracial Chinese American adoptee, adopted from Yiwu, Zhejiang, China. She grew up in Verona, New Jersey with her parents and pet cats. As a graduate of Goucher College, is that how you pronounce it? Okay, Goucher College. She received a master's in cultural sustainability program. Laura explored topics of adoption identity, social barriers among adoptive parents, cultural context surrounding adoptees in the United States, and a holistic group processing techniques. Laura has 8 years of research and mentorship experience throughout her local adoptive communities. She now lives and works in Denver, Colorado, pursuing licensure as a marriage and family therapist. Combining in with her past research, Laura hopes to merge her two fields of study in an innovative gift for continued exploration of intersectionality identity development throughout one's lifetime.
Super. So the way it's going to work is that we're going to start off with handing off the stage to Laura to introduce her work, and then we'll move on to some questions. If you go to the comments in YouTube, or if you want to tweet at us, we can also take some questions in from members as they come in. So without further ado, Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I kind of wanted to start with kind of framing my background and research, like questioning what is cultural sustainability, and then how does it have anything to do with marriage and family therapy. But starting back just in high school, I always felt like I needed people around me who had who shared the same mind, I guess, of being a transracially adopted Asian in America and having white parents. So I started organizing in my high school community, just doing lunch get-togethers with other people who are adopted, either from Russia or domestically in the United States as well. And that kind of empowered me to go on into college and start a club as well. And it's almost was a selfish act, but at the same time, pulling in people who also had similar needs for community and connection as I did. And kind of on riffing off that, I decided I wanted to study sociology and systems. And systems is a big part of cultural sustainability work and thinking about community building and organizing, as well as activism in the community towards social change. And that really, I really feel like higher education has gave me the tools needed to kind of come closer to myself, as well as look at myself and my context around me and adoption and international adoption and the history of that from many different perspectives. And that kind of very diverse and expansive thinking has led me to basically ask really deep questions of like, what is an interracial family mean? What is multiculturalism? And then what does it matter to ourselves and others in the world? And my hope is always that what can the world learn from adoption, and what can adoption learn from the world around us as well? And that kind of mutual relationship going back and forth, I think, is something that I really hold as a value in like researching adoption and the prospect of it and the promise of it. And then kind of moving out of cultural sustainability, I was working with it was on 2 years of intense research of interviewing individuals who were just adopted from all walks of life, adopted internationally, domestically, and also interfamily. And sometimes families with same-sex parents who are biologically related to one and then adopted by the other, realizing what that means, what that context of adoption means, and identity. And then moving into marriage and family therapy also deals a lot with systems and similar veins of self-exploration and finding what works best for the individual in hopes that it will permeate out into the larger community and family. And we can't think about adoption ourselves in a vacuum alone, since we're all kind of connected and it's all towards the larger change that we want to see in the world. And even CCI and the rise of, movies like Lion and the acknowledgement of National Adoption Awareness Month, the adoption is definitely getting a platform to be more loud, like Charlotte was saying. So on that tone, I guess we can jump into the questions and kind of explore what's on the minds of you all today.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. Let's see. The first thing I wanted to ask, I guess, is whether there was anything that you wanted to add to your introduction. And as a kind of aside to that, is there anything that you would feel comfortable sharing about your personal adoption story? For example, when were you adopted? How old are you? Sort of what your experience is growing up. And if not, that's totally fine too.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I didn't realize going to adoption research is like how hard it can be and how many caveats there were. And it's like I chose to study adoption and look at it in a very critical way and look at myself in a very critical way. And that's hard. And being able to be honest and open and vulnerable with myself was really a journey, and being able to step into even acknowledging trauma and acknowledging loss and acknowledging difference. I think it's natural to want to fit in and kind of be happy and easy life kind of thing. But sometimes stepping into that of who I am, and I guess what I want to do with my life is an ongoing thing. So I was adopted when I was 7 months from, again, Zhejiang, China, and grew up in New Jersey. And I'm an only child, and I have just two parents who are born and raised in New Jersey. So every time I talk to my mom, or New Jersey accent sometimes comes out, and I remember where the context of where I'm local, I would say, going off of a TED Talk from about don't ask me where I'm from, ask me where I'm local. I definitely am local of there. And I feel like I didn't know I was adopted, or I always knew I was adopted, but I didn't know I was Asian until I had this conversation with my dad when I went to community college. Was people are going to meet you as Asian, and it's your decision to say if you're adopted or not. And that kind of put the ball in my court. And I was like, I've never had to deal with that, and I'm here over and over again. And I love the I have a similar experience connection happens between other adoptees when we kind of talk about these things. And that kind of got me really excited. Like, this feels good. This feels good to kind of be like, I'm going through the same thing, and like I've been there, and like I definitely have mentors who are about 20 years older than me who have shaped me as well. So I think growing up on the East Coast has really shaped my orientation towards adoption and my attitude toward adoption, and I try to be very open and honest about that too.
Awesome. And let's see, what do I want to bring up? I think I want to talk a little bit about what your findings in your research. And I know it's difficult to sort of summarize many years of work, but if you had to do your best in trying to share some of what you've found through your research, would you give it a shot?
Yeah, absolutely. My capstone, my master's thesis is titled "The Missing Piece," PACE, Offerings from the Study of Adoption, Culture, and Identity. And I was taking the angle of a play on word of the missing piece in terms of knowing where you're from, feeling really grounded, of knowledge, like the piece that knowledge can bring. And also, but like when you're adopted, there's a missing piece, like puzzle piece of your story, of your creation story, if you will. So kind of thinking about that, I was thinking about the metaphor of a mandala and kind of how it can bring about peace of either coloring a mandala or thinking through it, but also how it kind of holds these lots of little tiny parts of a whole. So the one thing that cultural sustainability also taught me is that having the hard management skills is also needed to make change, and that like the project management, the grant writing, the I guess the nonprofit management as well, that kind of level of work. So kind of thinking about that, I definitely think that I found that the more that adoption is kind of discussed in an intentional way, in a very intentional manner, when people come with fully briefed about what's going to happen and like why they're there, it can really lead to some really insightful change. And that kind of is the point of kind of thinking about things differently. And the more like diffuse times adoptees would come together, it was a really great introduction. And it just kind of is our stages. Like first you need the introduction of just being around adoptees doing something else. But then like to get into, I really found that like getting into a more structured environment was really helpful in just making people feel more connected to each other, as well as their unknown adoption part. And then also, I feel like the future of adoption research, of where we are now, we kind of like are building on the shoulders of like the Korean and international adoptees and their legacy. And I really honor that and look to them as those leaders. And then the the Chinese adoptee population and us, me, I'm like just turned 25. We're kind of coming up in this wave, really looking at how adoptees work in their horizontal relationships in their community, thinking about their like future children, their future partners, their friends and family around them, and kind of building this network of care around an adoptee that also has cultural sensitivity and bringing all these things into consideration, I think is also really important for the future, and kind of what I found was really important, because sometimes it surprised me when someone in my research said that growing up, sometimes the Chinese culture was pushed too much on them, kind of like, we would go to every Chinese New Year, we would make dumplings with everybody, and it was just like a lot. It was almost like way too much of Chinese culture at times. So thinking about that sensitivity and moving it into what it means to be Chinese American, Asian American, adoptee American in the context of where we are in the United States is really important, because it looks different in like Germany or England or even like in China, domestic adoption in China. So yeah, context is really important.
That's fantastic. And I think this wasn't a question I originally come up with, but I'm interested to hear what you think. And I really agree that context can be so important. And I'm wondering how we can, as an organization, as CCI, as an organization with members from so many countries, how can we be more sensitive and kind of be more sensitive to the fact that the different country contexts matter?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I love the idea of like an international Chinese society or group, because that's also like brings together us in unity of like being from China, like you were saying, but also like thinking about what it means to just go back as an adoptee to China and the feelings that come up like from there, and also linking those back to your upbringing. Because like I remember I've been to China 4 times, and each time was very different. And the most recent time I was at Zhejiang University presenting this research in the Providence University that I was adopted from. So there were layers of emotions, but also reality coming, like flushing into me at the same time. And I was angry, and that didn't know why. And I learned different methods and had tools to kind of process it. But in the same time, like it's intense. And then thinking about everyone's coming from different, I guess, raised country contexts, what that means to go back as well is something that is potentially a point of future conversation. But even talking about different ways of people's family structure and the system of family, and how the dynamics and the cultural values that come up in as you're being raised, I think are something that we can work with communities outside the adopted community with. And that's one thing that's really like hopeful. I'm hopeful for the future of like having these connections and these bridging these communities to kind of get to more effective ways of being human and more helpful ways.
That's super. Yeah, I heard that you had been invited to present your research in China, and I thought that was really amazing. So congratulations on that. I didn't.
Thank you.
Now that I hear, I definitely can see how it would be a very intense experience. And thank you for sharing your honest thoughts on and sort of emotional reaction there. I'm also curious if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about what the sort of reception of your work and what your findings were in China, because I know that, I'm not sure, maybe in the academic community it might be a little bit different, but I think there's not as much dialogue or kind of discussion of the effects of one-child policy, and then sort of extending that into the lives of Chinese adoptees in mainland China, as I would hope. So I'm really curious if what you found the reception to be.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to mention too, that kind of ties into your first question to this, is that my parents have been extremely supportive of they were there for my presentation in Zhejiang, and they have always prioritized my connection to China and my connection to being a Chinese adoptee. And that's something that is so priceless that I thank them every day for. But at the same time, they know that I have a lot of experience of, emotions towards adoption, and that they've been very gentle with me in my intense sadness, intense anger, intense joy, intense longing, like all of those. But to that point of how it was perceived in China, in the academic, it was an international conference. So I was in a section about cultural reconciliation and kind of talking about this, I guess, merging and coming together of nation states and what adoption has to do with that. And the one thing that's sticking out in my mind is that I connected with a 4th generation Hong Kong, Australian-born guy who really kind of identified with this kind of multifaceted identity and of being Asian in a Western society, growing up in a Western society or a white community. And that was really interesting. And like, he really was, his research had completely, was kind of like on the, like a different plane than adoption, but at the same time, we found connections of identity and kind of what it went through of stepping into your own identity and doing research in that, and the kind of responsibility that you have to yourself and others while you do it, of being thoughtful and intentional and caring, but also a leader almost in it. So the only other reactions were actually really supportive. They were like, I haven't thought of that. It's really great that you're making these connections. The fact that the other people in the session were talking about museums, and I was kind of came out of left field and kind of talked about, well, no, this is cultural reconciliation happens like in our lives every day. And even cultural sustainability practice of who you are and thinking and being engaging with others around you happens every day. And I think everybody is connected to that. And it's really exciting to be able to share that with everybody and the world.
That's super. All right. Okay. One more question from me, and then I'll turn it over to see if the rest of the board has any questions. But another thing that I was curious about is if we can bring it back to research methodology for a little bit. I understand that part of your research was based on semi-structured interviews of adoptees. Attending, I think most of them were attending a private four-year liberal arts college on the East Coast, and then you had broke them down into different focus groups. Let me see. And yeah, I wondered what your experience in holding these interviews was like as somebody who is also has, is so close to these kinds of experiences.
Yeah, I love that question because it was almost like an out-of-body experience of trying to think about when I was sitting in my interviews. I had an interview guide, and it's semi-structured. It's just like you have a set amount of questions, but at the same time you let it open to flexibility of where the conversation will go. And I loved how much I learned from just sitting with these individual people one-on-one about different parts of the world. Because at a private liberal arts college on the East Coast, you sometimes get a lot of people all the way from Oregon or California. So being able to sit with those different walks of life made me just open my mind a little bit more to each person. It opened my mind a little bit more to the potential of human experience and the adoptee experience. And the biggest thing that I thought was really cool was kind of checking in with them the next year and bringing them all together and then seeing how much they've grown in terms of being able to think about adoption in different ways. And it was just really cool to see that kind of movement and energy in the room, and then like feeding off of each other and just other people's experiences. There was like, we mentioned like Big Bird went to China and growing up and watching that, and it was just like a really great, for me, it was just a really awesome moment of just like, wow, this like happens to other people too. And like I thought like I was the only one that is like a very specific thing that was in my life that has touched other people's lives. And the same thing can go with of adoption, like how it's like a very specific thing of like being adopted from China, but it just connects you to other people as well, but also honoring your own experience. So being able to hold those two things for me was very eye-opening and like almost like a breath of fresh air, because earlier it was just kind of like before I was kind of like had a lot of questions and didn't know how to cut the cake in terms of topics to talk about and directions to go. So kind of opening it up to other people, kind of guiding me and walking with me through it was really, really great. And I'm really thankful to everybody I know about who has done that for me and with me.
That's fantastic. All right, I have so many other questions, but I'm going to open it up to see if anybody else on this call, if anybody wants to jump in. Mary?
Hi. One of my questions that I actually was thinking about when you talked about that you first only kind of recognized like, yes, I'm Asian, that is my identity. When you said that your dad told you like you will be perceived as Asian in community college. I'm wondering, because for me it was actually like in kindergarten, people recognized me and said like, oh, you look so Asian without your glasses, way back as a kid before I even understood what adoption was. So I'm kind of wondering, being from North Jersey and I'm from South Jersey, do you think that people just accepted you for who you were, or your family introduced you and kind of like, you were already like assimilated into your family? So maybe I'm just wondering, like, I guess if your community kind of like accepted you as either a Chinese adoptee or like just as a fellow, probably even saw you as like another Caucasian in a majority group. I was wondering how you fit in those demographics.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because I didn't choose to pay attention to it until I was older, but it definitely happened to me. And this is a really good point to point out who I am and kind of like my perspective on. I was teased for not knowing my real mother, my birth mother. And I was teased for being different and having almond eyes. But the thing is, I didn't decide to pay attention to that, and I had the privilege to do that. And that is something that I've really been unpacking for myself recently, of what it means to have a white name, what it means in America, what it means to be brown in America, and being able to like hold that. I've built the capacity to be able to talk about it, because I love that you mentioned like, in the difference that we see in kindergarten for sure. Just like as young children, we like point out, are very blunt, there's no filters, and sometimes that can be very hurtful. And I definitely think that like there's the way I kind of framed it was, that's the way I coped with it growing up. I just kind of was like, I'm not thinking about it. I'm just gonna like achieve at the highest rate I can, for fear of being given up or rejection or like underachieving or all these things. which I definitely think is related to adoption and adoption identity and how we experience it, even though if we don't have words for it when we're younger. So yeah, like thank you for bringing that up, because like even though my parents told me my adoption story over and over again, I wouldn't fully grasp all the details until I was older and I started asking myself, and I was like, you never told me that. And they were like, yeah, we have, like a bunch of times, but you just weren't ready to hear it and digest it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your experience. Yeah.
Hi, Laura. I was skimming through your research and I noticed that you have a section about trauma. So I was wondering how you kind of perceive, or I guess from your interviews with other adoptees and your own experience, how you perceive reconciling with the trauma of adoption. But then I think a really big thing for some adoptees is recognizing the trauma in the first place, because I think that in a lot of different adoptee experiences can be quite understated. And I was wondering how you kind of went about investigating that.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I want to honor that some people don't feel trauma, or like some adoptees don't acknowledge that the trauma part of adoption. And I chose to acknowledge it. And the point of acknowledging it for me was to offer a different lens on what other people were experiencing as well as myself. So it's like, well, why am I not able to study for or write a paper for tomorrow, or get ready for a big competition tomorrow, and just kind of paralyzed. And like it could be a lot of different reasons, but sometimes like for me, looking at, well, trauma studies, what trauma does, what does trauma even mean? Most times trauma is something that happens to us, rather than we choose to have trauma happen to us. So that level of control, that level of power dynamics in any situation like that, it really has helped me unravel some of my behaviors, and some of really insightful for how to cope with some of the feelings that I didn't have words for that now I do, but also I still don't have words for some things. And I'm learning every day about like how to, and like just trauma focused therapy to bring that in, and like cultural sensitivity towards other people and myself. Like I feel like it just has unraveled and opened a new helpful, constructive lens for me to I guess explore and play in, if you will, and make other connections. Thank you, Ava.
I have another question.
Yeah, please.
I'm actually wondering if you think that for Chinese adoptees, if they had a Chinese adoptee therapist, if you think that there's any benefit to that, if there's any differences, what do you think could come out of having, like, you know, someone who relates to you rather than just a normal family therapist?
Yeah, that's an awesome consideration and thought, because, you know, I feel like it's not for everybody and it's not helpful for everybody. And I talk about fit a lot with clients of like, you know, I'm not a good fit for some people and some people are not a good fit for me. So just kind of talking about like, it's okay to seek help outside and elsewhere. And also this brings up a really good point about having almost like partnering with other perspectives outside of a community to help bridge, basically, or help to like move forward any potential work that we want to do towards like a better way of living. And I feel like sometimes just some people really look for, and some parents really look for, you know, like these qualifications for therapists. Like they have to be a woman of color, a woman, come from a certain background, have a certain licensure, and all these things. But then some other people just kind of want just like an unbiased someone outside their perspective opinion. And that's totally valid, and that's totally needed too, I think, just to match people where they are. And then sometimes if you're going through therapy and you find that, well, maybe you do need someone who has more connect with more background as you do, then I think that's a stage thing, and I think that's a phase thing, and I think we grow and outgrow and ingrow people around us all the time. So I think that being open to that change is really, really important. And for me, not taking offense to that, or not thinking that we're not good enough or we're not doing the right thing. It's always like, realizing your own potential and then working with others to again, be a stronger society, if you want to get meta.
Awesome. Well, this has been such an interesting conversation, and thank you so much, Laura, especially with your patience for the technical difficulties, and also it ran a little bit long.
No problem.
One final question that we usually ask different people. For instance, we had people in entertainment, so we asked if some of our members were interested in getting involved in entertainment, then what would your advice be? So our question for you is, if any of our members are interested in getting involved in research on international adoption or Chinese adoption, do you have any advice for them, and how would you recommend that they get started?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I also want to mention that trusting yourself is something that's huge, and giving yourself permission to feel all the things that you're feeling and is something that I learned that anyone I would suggest going into research would do, because with that gentleness in yourself, I feel like something that I wish I kind of did a little bit nicer to myself and kind of more gracefully. I would definitely say that, like, if you have the opportunity to go into research about adoption and you have that outlet for yourself, like, please lean into it as much as you can, because and be gentle with yourself in that, because like it's something that not everybody has opportunity to do and has access to. And I always like saying it, like using my powers for good and kind of using like all the opportunity and the privilege that was offered to me to give back, and always do it for a reason, for like something that matters is something that I've always wanted to do and orient to always give back. So I guess the other thing that I would say is like willing to ask for help, because I've had to reach out to my mentors like in crisis, and then think back and be like, oh, I feel so like silly for like being so like, I don't know, like out of control a certain way, but at the same time, like it's just made me stronger. But then like integrating that into who you are and moving forward through it, I think is something else that's really that research can offer you and also others. And then the last thing I wanted to say was the transformative power of like talking to other people and like connecting with other people, and just kind of being open to that transformation. And because that's kind of goes back to what cultural sustainability is about and what therapy is about, and recognizing your power to do that for yourself, and also like empower yourself to be able to like, I can disclose that I'm adopted in this context because I feel safe. Like I can be empowered to not disclose my adopted identity in this space because I'm not safe. And giving yourself permission to do that, I think, is really important. So thank you.
No, that's fantastic. And I think that's also a really good place to wrap up, although there's so much more that I could ask you about, and maybe we can have the honor of inviting you back. But before we wrap up, we would like to thank all of our viewers for joining us in our chat with Laura. And of course, we'd like to give an extra special thank you to Laura for kindly agreeing to join us today on behalf of the Chinese adoption community, Chinese adoptee community. We'd also like to recognize all of your research and work and kind of inspiring words and presence within our greater community. So thank you for that. And again, this has been a guest speaker chat held by China Children International one of the first international support and networking organizations created by and for Chinese adoptees. The link to our site will also be in the description, so be sure to check us out. And as a final word, thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Super.
Thanks,
We are now off the air, and the